Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Akshay Baboo, and I'm the program manager for wine production at Plumpton College. I have been making wine around the world for the last 12 years, and I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry, botany, and zoology from Bangalore University in India, a national diploma in Oenology from Montpellier, a master's in viticulture and Oenology from Montpellier, and Bordeaux, and a doctorate in viticulture from the University of Turin in Italy. My research for both of my last two degrees looked into rootstocks. I have since worked in France for some of the most renowned chateaux in Bordeaux, and I have consulted for family vineyards across Europe, including in France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Germany. My last assignment saw me overseeing the winemaking and viticulture for a large conglomerate in India, where we produced in excess of 9 million cases of wine per year. My talk today is on choosing the right rootstock, the intersection of sustainability, organoleptic potential, and yield. So naturally, the first question and a small introduction is, why do we need rootstocks? Well, in the 17 and 1800s, a lot of French farmers decided that it would be interesting to grow grapes that they had found in Louisiana and in Texas, and see if they could create a wine that was a lot a lot more different, more varied than what they were traditionally producing. So when they started planting this, they didn't know that along with the roots of these plants came an uninvited guest. Now, it would take a long time before this manifested in any sensible way for people to understand that. And in the 1850s, there was what was known as the Great French Blight. Now, let me just set the stage for you a little bit. You are a small farmer living in the south of France near the town of Nîmes, and you come out one day just after bloom and berry set, and you suddenly start seeing a circle, not many plants, a circle of probably 20 plants to begin with, that have started having the leaves go yellow, and the bunches that were green and ready to ripen to full maturity start turning yellow and brown and cankerous. You watch this for the first week, the next week, the week after that, and you suddenly see the numbers increasing, the circle becoming bigger and wider and larger. Over the years, all the vineyards around your area turn to be this way. In your imagination at that point, this could be nothing short of an act of God, or you may have done something to upset God or something like that, which is why this is turning up on you. There were a lot of different things that were tried. People tried to get the priest to bless their land. People tried injecting a lot of pesticides into the earth. Everything was tried, but they could not find who the culprit was. The culprit, to find that, they had to wait till 1860, when they had to contact a biologist at the University of Montpellier to try and discover what was going on. That biologist at the University of Montpellier was also a member of the Agricultural University. His name was Jules-Émile Planchot. Now, he figured out that the offending organism was an aphid by the name of phylloxera. Now, what he also noticed was it was only the French varietals or the European varietals that were having an issue. The farmers who had also interspersed their plantation with the American varietals had no issues. They did not seem to care about the fact that there was something afoot with the rest of the varietals. And so it was blind luck that Emile Planchon ran into a very, very interesting person whose name was Felix Soho. He was a local grower, and he started playing around with trying to move or trying to plant French grapes or the traditional European grape varietals onto American roots. And over many years, he, along with a lot of different other farmers, both in the U.S., in Britain, in France, they pioneered the method of grafting a scion, what we call currently a scion, the varietal, so to speak, Chardonnay, whatever, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, all of that, onto the various rootstocks. Now, that was all well and good in the turn of the 20th century. Everyone knew about phylloxera. There was no problems. People knew exactly what was going on, and things seemed okay. Things seemed okay until about the late 70s and early 80s. Suddenly, in Napa, people started seeing symptoms of phylloxera again. So much so that they made an appeal to the senator, who made an appeal to the United States Air Force, who then started using their reconnaissance planes, as pictured here, flying all around Northern California, the Napa Valley, and down south into the Sonoma Valley. And they were trying to figure out that they all planted on rootstocks. They suddenly had no idea why a particular rootstock was not working. Why was phylloxera back? Now, the rootstock in question was a rootstock by the name of AXR1. Now, AXR1 had two parents. One was rupestris, which was an American varietal which had no problems with phylloxera. The other one was Aramo. Now, Aramo is a French grape varietal that is still used to make some very light wines, and it was this that caused a bunch of trouble coming the way of the Californians. A lot of wineries lost a lot of land to phylloxera. There were some that were spared from this, those who did not plant on AXR1. And therefore, what was finally understood was that there shouldn't be any vinifera crosses, or if there are any vinifera crosses in the rootstocks, the vinifera crosses must be relatively low. The percentage of the vinifera in that cross should be very low, and if at all possible, we must use just the American varietals and not any vinifera in the crossing. Now, what are the factors that affect choice? There are many such factors. One of the most important ones is the soil strata. Now, it all depends on how your soil is made up, if you can use a particular rootstock or not, and that depends on how the rootstocks form their roots. Now, if you have, let's say, a very, very rocky strata of soil where you really don't have too much soil going deep down, you can use a certain set of rootstocks there. You can't use another set that requires some soil and water in and around there. It's quite a finicky factor in the choice, and when you are about to plant, it is best to take the advice of a viticulturist or a rootstock consultant or a rootstock expert, because they are people who have had a lot of interaction with rootstocks, and they can help you out making the right choice. There are, of course, the other aspects are soil salinity, the type of soil, how good is the drainage, how deep is the drainage, how long does the soil hold water, and of course, most importantly, what is the scion that you're using? What is the varietal that you are using? Because some rootstocks and scions are incompatible with each other. Some of them are more compatible than others. Now, what can rootstocks do for you? Well, first of all, the major goal is to be resistant to phylloxera. But more so than that, they have to be resistant to the environment that they're growing in, because they have to provide some level of protection to you as the farmer from phylloxera, yes, but also from the environment. Remember, these aren't the vine's roots; these aren't Vitis vinifera roots. Therefore, we have to use the roots of a second plant, and therefore they have to be resistant to things like wet soils, lime, in other countries, drought and salinity and things like that. What they also affect is they affect the vigor of the scion. They have a bearing on the yield that is produced. They have a bearing on how the scion advances or retards maturity. They have a bearing definitely on the nutrition uptake of the scion. So here we see a schematic having three rootstock parents: Vitis riparia, Vitis rupestris, Vitis berlandieri, with the addition of one more Vitis longi. And what are the various rootstocks that come from the crossings with these parents? So, for example, here you can see Vitis riparia and Vitis rupestris have, in this case, I've just shown three. They have many more than three crossings, but the three crossings that I have shown here are 3309 Couder, 10114 Milatete Grasse, and Schwarzmann. Now, in terms of environmental tolerance, let's first talk about wet soil. So soils that are heavy, soils that have a lot of clay, and in this case, most of the parentage that we should be looking at is anything that contains the riparia parent. Riparia is from the Greek term river, which means it can withstand heavy soils, and if we look at that, we can see the Vitis riparia with Vitis longi having 1616C. That is one of the highest tolerant rootstocks to wet soils, but it has its own particularities that we will get into later. Riparia and berlandieri have some very, very well-known offspring. So we have 428 Teleki 5B and SO4 along with 5BB. Those are the traditional varietals that we can see in cooler climates. In warmer climates, we do see 3309 Couder, 10114 MGT, and Schwarzmann. And Rupestris berlandieri parentage, we do have 1103 Paulson, which is relatively good with wet soils, and so is 110 Richter, but 110 Richter is very vigorous, so there are other stories that we have to discuss when it comes to vigor. Now, in terms of lime tolerance, we can look at, again, the kind of parentage we have is berlandieri, rupestris. These tend to have a lot of lime tolerance. Now, of course, berlandieri with some vinifera parentages creates things like 41B, 333EM, and Fercal, all of which have very good lime tolerance, but in the case of Fercal, it doesn't like wet soils. 41B is relatively okay, but again, we will see as to why some of these are better than the others. In terms of lime tolerance, it's very hard to beat something like 1103 Paulson or 140 Ruggeri. They are some of the best in the game. So is 420A. They just the typical ones that are used in the UK, such as SO4 and SO4, is not as good in terms of lime tolerance as, let's say, its cousins in 420A or 5BB, which are much higher in terms of lime tolerance. In terms of vigor, we have to understand what vigor means. Vigor is basically the conference. So in this term, in terms of a rootstock, it simply means, does the parent or does the rootstock confer some amount of vigor onto the plant? And in most cases, yes. So if we look at what we have in terms of vigor, in terms of the rootstocks that are present, low vigor rootstocks such as SO4, 420A, 1616C should be more preferred in cooler climates like the UK, because effectively what we do not want to see is a lot of leaves, very few bunches, very small bunches, and the wine continually putting out leaves. So that is something that is an interesting aside that we need to take in. Now, SO4, for example, has a low vigor, but it's not nearly as low as something like 420A, which has very, very low vigor in comparison. The other rootstocks like 110R or 140RU, they all tend to be pretty high vigor, and those are common with rupestris berlandieri crosses, because both rupestris and berlandieri are quite vigorous rootstocks on their own. Now, in terms of yield, what we did was we looked at, so my collaborators and I in 2014, we looked at 20 years worth of data for different rootstocks on the GM3 Chardonnay clone. This was on a 32-acre vineyard that was planted in 1988 in Hattenheim in Germany. And of course, the entire vineyard was created by the University of Geisenheim, and therefore it was completely factorial and designed such that we can get very good and very high resolution from the data that we could pick up. Now, in the case of yield per plant, we did find some significance. We have, of course, in this table, we have a lot of experimental varietals, but there are some that are more mainstream. In terms of yield, the ones that are more mainstream that we found to have a very high amount of yield in terms of grams. So on the x-axis here, we have yield per vine in grams, and these are the rootstocks that we have. The one that we did find most appropriate in terms of yield in terms of the non-experimental rootstocks, the ones that are currently on the market, is Berner. Berner was a rootstock that showed significantly higher yields than most other parentages, and it showed an average yield which was higher than other averages. So it was quite a good varietal. Then let's speak about maturity in terms of technological maturity. When I speak about technological maturity, I'm just talking about Brix or Oecksler or Baboo or whatever measure that you use to measure the total soluble solids. And in the case of these rootstocks, we did find some significance. Again, we had greater amount of sugar or greater amount of total soluble solids that we saw was in 8B and Berner rootstocks, along with 125AA and 28G. SO4 was about mid-range, and then we had a load of experimental rootstocks that were above or below them. In terms of pH, again, we saw higher pHs tending to be from Berner and 8B, along with 125AA. And this is fairly straightforward, because as we tend to increase the amount of sugar present, it's normal that we would see an increase in the pH. In terms of phenological maturity or maturity of aromas and tannins and anthocyanins, there was a very, very strong correlation with rootstocks such as for anthocyanins such as SO4. In terms of phenols, again, it was SO4. In terms of tannins, SO4 was pretty good, but there were quite a few others that ticked off quite a few boxes. For example, in terms of anthocyanins, 5C was very good, 420A was very good. In terms of tannins, we had 5BB, Koba, that's Koba 5BB or Teleki 5BB, it's the same rootstock. They were very good, and it's an indicator that you can use for deciding which rootstock to plant. It's an indicator because, again, this is very site specific. Then we went and looked at the vine nutrition and how each vineyard, how each rootstock supplied nutrition to the scion. And what we found was quite interesting. Things like Koba 5BB or Teleki 5BB, Teleki 5 or SO4, they all provided reasonably good amounts of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus to the plant. However, it becomes important for us to realize when we start using other rootstocks from different parentages that we need to be, so for example, if in this case we wanted to use 110 Richter, we know that provides good nitrogen and good phosphorus. However, we may need to support the plant with additional amounts of potassium nutrients. So it's very important when we look at the roots, when we look at the science, that we take each rootstock on its own and understand what it gives to the scion. In terms of trace elements, we did find that in the case of SO4, you need to support SO4 with a lot of zinc and calcium. It provides enough magnesium on its own, but you do need to support the scions with zinc and calcium because it's not able to uptake as much as it should in terms of these two minerals. What was more better in the crosses between Riparia and Berlandieri was to have something like 5BB, which was good enough, which was one of the best rootstocks that we examined that could influence a lot of trace minerals being taken up by the scion. Now, in terms of disease, and when I said I would touch very briefly on disease, this was because in terms of botrytis, we did not see any significance across rootstocks. However, we did see trends across rootstocks. What this means, and what this was the inference to us as the researchers on this project, was that it was not, while the rootstock did provide some level of conferred resistance to the scion, it was at the most influencing factor was the scion susceptibility to botrytis. Therefore, we cannot cure botrytis, but we can probably, if a scion is, or if a variety is resistant to some level of botrytis, we can enhance that with the use of rootstocks such as SO4. My mistake. Rootstocks such as Burner. Now, SO4, on the other hand, tends to show much higher average botrytis. It confers, or rather, it confers the lack of being botrytis resistant. But again, this is just because the scion effect is a lot greater in terms of botrytis. However, on the right, in the graph on the right, we did note that in terms of bunt stem necrosis, we did find fairly significant results, and these results were supported in multiple years. Again, of course, you have to understand that the data we had was 20 years worth of aggregate data. So when we studied it over bunt stem necrosis, we did find that 8B and Burner did show less amount of bunt stem necrosis than rootstocks like SO4 or indeed 5BB, which showed some of the highest. So the question then becomes, which rootstock should you choose? Well, it depends on the soil, the climate, the scion variety, the pest and disease pressure that you have. But most importantly, this is all available to you when there is sufficient research in your geographical area. When sufficient research is done on rootstocks in your geographical area, only then can you receive accurate values or accurate guidance on which rootstocks to use. So it is worth everyone contributing something towards research into rootstocks. And with said rootstock, I mean, it does take a long time to get these results, but any day, any step in the right direction is welcome. And we will need to do a lot of research into rootstocks before we can decide a particular rootstock in a particular area in the UK is most appropriate. Thank you, and have a very nice day.